comprehensive tactical preview to Barcelona against Bayern Munich in the Champions League. Yes, we'll be talking systems and setups, strengths and weaknesses, key players, and if you stick around until the end, you'll hear my prediction on who I think has the edge going into this one. This is the first time doing a tactical preview like this on the channel, so if you want to see more of this, then consider giving this video a like. It's the best way for me to gauge what kind of content you guys want to see. So with all that said, let's do it. So let's start with Bayern Munich, and Bayern's shape this season under Julian Nagelsmann has been a very interesting 4-2-2-2, which is really about getting as many creative players in the side as possible, giving them the freedom to move and rotate between the lines, and giving the team a lot of verticality. On the ball, you'll see the two pivots get really close to each other, almost matching each other stride for stride, and with the fullbacks wide, this lays the foundations for the attackers to start moving and create passing options. These front players also get quite close to each other and tend to do a lot of their work with 1 and 2 touches, working it between them before then getting into the box. Intelligent synchronized movement is what makes this possible, and you'll often see these kind of crossovers where a forward drops deep and a midfielder runs forward, provoking either a ball over the top or into feet, and that uncertainty is really tough to deal with. I mean, the numbers alone that Bayern get between the lines make it really hard to block all of the passing lanes, and on top of that you've got unpredictable movement and rotations to deal with. It's honestly a brilliant system, but it does require high technical quality, which Nagelsmann obviously has at his disposal. If Bayern do need width, they can call on the likes of Kingsley Coman, although he's out injured for the first game against Barca at least, and it's usually Alphonso Davies patrolling the entire left-hand channel. Out of possession, Bayern are probably the most aggressive side in Europe. They thoroughly squeeze the space around the ball at every possible opportunity. The biggest indicator of this is the use of the fullbacks, who are bold enough to step up and press the opposing fullback in most situations. It's a really well coordinated system and it's super aggressive. There's not really any point in the game when Bayern relents on their pressure, and it's why they dominate possession in pretty much every game. The opposition just can't handle the heat. That said, when you press this aggressively, you inevitably leave spaces somewhere, and for Bayern this is obviously at the back. Not only is this an insanely high line, but the centre-backs shift across to squeeze the pitch as much as possible, meaning the space against this system is both in behind and on the opposite flank. The problem is just getting it there, and frankly not many teams actually manage that. If you can though, you really do unlock a lot of space to exploit. As for Barcelona, I'm going to mainly talk about their 4-3-3 because I think that's what we'll see from Xavi Hernandez in this game, although I briefly will cover the potential for a 3-4-3 at the end of this section. But in the 4-3-3, Barca are based very much on being expansive and stretching the opposition, both in the first phase with their wide fullbacks and in the final third with the wingers. The idea is to be so wide that you prevent the opposition from being compact. You literally force space to be created somewhere, and Xavi's Barca look to exploit that space very quickly. In build-up, rather than just relying on numerical advantages to progress, it's more about movement and manipulation. Barca use third man principles a lot, often between the interiors and the pivot, and also the centre forward and the interiors, and this frees up the progressive players in the team like Busquets and Pedri to then hit the wide channels, where Barca have some extremely devastating wide creators who excel in 1 versus 1 scenarios. If teams are more likely to sit back, then it becomes about creating triangles and passing combinations, often overloading one side before switching it out into space, but the principle of being very wide remains. Once they've got the ball out to the flanks, Barca look for crosses and cutbacks or underlapping runs to attack the box, and there's usually a fair amount of players lurking in there to take advantage. Out of possession, like Bayern, Barca are extremely aggressive, never really settling into a compact shape, but always trying to apply pressure on the ball. This is most effective in transition, and Barca's counter press is quite good. They swarm the ball immediately after it's lost and in numbers, but this aggression even applies when the opponents establish more secure possession. In this case, it's purely a man-to-man approach. When the ball moves on, each player has the responsibility to close down their opposite number. This is a little different from Bayern, who press more as a unit, pushing the centre-backs and the full-backs really high, essentially creating a block of pressure around the ball. Comparatively, Barca's system has the drawback that any one lapse in concentration can lead to a free man appearing for the opponents. However, it does have one sort of benefit, which is that when Barca do win the ball back, the attacking players are naturally a little bit wider than they would be if the whole team had become compact, and Barca make really good use of this space, and actually at the moment they're one of the most dangerous teams around in transition. And that leads us perfectly onto how this tactical battle will actually play out. So how will it play out, Mr. Purist? I thought the best way to simplify this and make it easy to understand is to break it down into what I think will be the two most likely scenarios, A and B. Scenario A in my mind is the most likely, and that's a world where it's Bayern that impose their authority on the game and have a little bit more possession, while Barca look to be very direct and a force in transition. This won't be because Barca actively sit back, but it's down to the way that the two teams press. Like we saw in their game against Sevilla last week, when both Barca centre-backs are under pressure and they're outnumbered in midfield, they're not shy in going direct, and that's exactly what Bayern are going to do. Unless one of those direct balls pays off early, I think Xavi's team will concede a lot of turnovers. Bayern, on the other hand, will probably have more joy getting out the press, and that's because of their numerical advantage in midfield, 4 versus 3. It's going to be really hard to close down all of the passing lanes and stop those attacking players receiving between the lines. I do also think that when Bayern go direct, they'll probably have more chance of retaining the ball, and again that's because of the numbers they have around it, along with the physical presence of a player like Mane. In scenario A, there's a huge responsibility on Barca's midfield and defence to prevent these free players appearing between the lines. There's going to be so much movement and interchanging, and this especially goes for the centre-backs, who will need to be both aggressive and intelligent. On the one hand, they'll be stepping into midfield a lot to close down players dropping deep, but they also need to be wary of those crossover movements we talked about, where if you're too aggressive, your man is just going to run off your shoulder in behind. So this is a really tough job. Of course, if Barca get it right and win the ball with Bayern players caught up the pitch, they'll do serious damage on the counter-attack. Scenario B is a much more pleasant one for Barca fans, and that's the world where they actually find their way through Bayern's press. This is going to require both bravery and technical perfection from Xavi's team, but structurally it's absolutely possible, and that's because of the width of Barca's back line. Let's say Davies and Pavard, the Bayern fullbacks, don't press high and are pinned back by Barca's wingers, while the interiors are marked by Kimmich and Sabitzer. This actually creates a 5 versus 4 in Barca's favour in the first phase. Because Bayern are so compact in their press, the space is often available on the opposite flank. Barca just need to identify and exploit it quickly. If they do so, then that will be a real avenue to what is Xavi's preferred way of playing. Although, based on how aggressive Bayern are, once you've opened up that space, you really have to get into the final third quickly, otherwise they'll end up forcing you back again. Of course, the reality is likely going to be a combination of both of these scenarios. The first 15-20 minutes will probably see more of scenario A, especially if it remains 0-0 for a while, but if Barca weather the storm or even score themselves, we could definitely see more of scenario B happening, where they get into some nice little possession and test a Bayern backline that hasn't really been tested much this season. By the way, I mentioned Xavi's potential to switch things up to a 3-4-3, and that would obviously change things a little bit. The big benefit of this system is that you would reduce the numerical deficit in midfield. There'd be far less burden on Gavi and Pedri to drop in and support Busquets, because they have quite an important role playing high up and giving Bayern's two pivots something to think about. They'll be less likely to do that if they're having to cover defensively all the time. However, the disadvantage of 3-4-3 is that it actually actually might hurt your own ability to play out from the back. It's a bit risky to stretch the pitch in the first phase when the 2 of the 3 centre-backs have to essentially hug the touchline. A system where you're 4-3-3 in possession and 3-4-3 out of it could be interesting, but then maybe you're giving your wingers too much defensive burden. I don't know, this is why Xavi gets paid the big bucks. I do think it would be pretty bold of him to try something like this, but I suppose we can't rule it out completely. Anyway, that's a lot of theory and speculation. So before I tell you who my money is on, we have to discuss the most important element of this game, and that's the players themselves. So here are the 3 major battles on the pitch that I think might determine this game. As you might have realised, the midfield battle is going to be really important, and there are 2 players in there that are essentially the fulcrums of either team, and that's Joshua Kimmich and Pedri. Kimmich in particular is so crucial to Bayern's progression. Even when it looks like there's no option on, his ability to see and execute these eye-of-the-needle passes is astonishing, and it's his crazy passing range that gives Bayern so many attacking options. You want a line-breaking ball into feet? You've got it. You want a pinpoint ball over the top? Easy. Preventing Kimmich from having time and space is step 1 of not losing to this team, and that responsibility may well fall to Pedri, depending on whether Kimmich plays as a left or right pivot. Pedri, meanwhile, as you Barca fans will know, is effectively the glue that holds this team together, positionally filling in for basically everyone around him, and on the ball knows exactly when to calm things down and keep possession, and when to hit those cross-field passes that are essential to Barca's strategy of attacking space. He's also flawless between the lines and his combinations with Lewandowski, and again, it might be Kimmich who has to deal with him when he takes up these kind of positions, although it could also be one of the Bayern centre-backs stepping up. If you're watching this game and getting overwhelmed by the tactical whirlwind at any point, just watch these 2 and you'll have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Basically, whichever of these is more prominent in this game will probably end up being on the winning side. Next up is a battle on Barca's backline / midfield, and that's Eric Garcia versus Musiala / Muller / Mane. And the reason why I mention all 3 is there's so much rotation, it's impossible to predict who's going to be there at any given time. Positionally though, I'm talking about Bayern's right half space, and this is an area where they get a lot of joy. What you usually see is someone pulling out wide, in this image it's Mane, but it could be anyone really, and getting someone else occupying the space in between the lines. The defender on that side for Barca is very likely to be Eric Garcia, and like we talked about earlier, his decision making of when and how aggressively to step up and close down this player is of utmost importance. If you go too early and too aggressively, it makes it easy for Mane to run in behind, and if you don't go at all, you risk this player receiving easily and turning. The jeopardy of this situation increases in transition, because it's very likely Pedri and Busquets will get caught higher up the pitch trying to press, and if Eric or Araujo get this wrong, that's big danger. Finally, we have to talk about the battle on the flanks, which I can only presume will be Rafinha versus Alphonso Davies. I say Rafinha because he's better defensively than Dembele, and someone will have to track those marauding runs forward. It also makes sense to have Dembele against Pavard on the left, who's not the quickest and could be exploited on the counter-attack. Anyway, preventing Davies from wandering into the box unmarked is important. Offensively for Barca, this is also a major battle. It'll be really interesting to see how aggressively Davies presses, whether there'll be space in behind him or whether he'll be a little more conservative, and in that case, will Rafinha or Dembele have the ability to get past him, which is something that I'm sure you know very few players do. So here we are, who do I think is going to win this game? And can we have a drum roll please? I've got to give it to Bayern. And I know the majority of you watching are probably Barca fans and that will disappoint you, but I have to be honest, when I watched the 2 teams side by side for this preview, it became apparent that Bayern are simply further along in their development as a team, and that's completely natural. They've had more time in this project and they're the more polished side. Barca have a lot of raw firepower and a lot of raw quality, but there's less of a consistent rhythm, and that's the key word for me, rhythm. Some of Bayern's passing combinations are incredible. It's one touch, two touch, pass and move stuff, and we're yet to see this version of Barca really reach that level, which can only happen after building relationships between players over time. Now, does that mean Bayern are for sure going to win this? Of course not. As we've already talked about, there are a lot of ways this Barca team can really hurt them. Structurally, Barca are pretty much the perfect team up against this Bayern side. They're super wide and expansive, they have really potent wingers, and Bayern leave a lot of space in those areas, so there is a lot of reason to be optimistic if you're a Barca fan, as long as they keep it tight at the back. After all, this is all just my opinion, and if you stuck with me all the way to the end, first of all, thank you, and second of all, let me know which way you think this is going to go based on the tactics. I'd love to get your opinion on it, and I'll try to respond to as many comments as possible, so do please